This is Peter's first letter to the church. Peter, of course, being the apostle that was so close to Christ during his ministry. Peter and John, James are most often referred to as the ones that are just kind of always with him. Peter was also the apostle that Jesus said he would be placing or building his church upon as a rock. Picking up at verse 9 on page 233. But you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's own people, in order that you may proclaim the mighty acts of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. Once you were not a people, but now you are God's people. Once you had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy. Beloved, I urge you as aliens and exiles to abstain from the desires of the flesh that war against the soul. Conduct yourselves honorably among the Gentiles or non-believers, so that though they may malign you as evildoers, they may see your honorable deeds and glorify God when he comes to judge. For the Lord's sake, accept the authority of every human institution, whether of the emperor as supreme, or of governors as supreme, or as sent by him to punish those who do wrong and to praise those who do right. For it is God's will that by doing right you should silence the ignorance of the foolish. As servants of God, live as free people, yet do not use your freedom as a pretext for evil. Honor everyone. Love the family of believers. Fear God. Honor the emperor. Slaves, accept the authority of your masters with all deference, not only those who are kind and gentle, but also those who are harsh. For it is a credit to you if, being aware of God, you endure pain while suffering unjustly. If you endure when you are beaten for doing wrong, what credit is that? But if you endure when you do right and suffer for it, you have God's approval. For to this you have been called, because Christ also suffered for you, leaving you an example, so that you should follow in his steps. He committed no sin, and no deceit was found in his mouth. When he was abused, he did not return abuse. When he suffered, he did not threaten, but he entrusted himself to the one who judges justly. He himself bore our sins in his body on the cross, so that, free from sins, we might live for righteousness. By his wounds you have been healed. For you were going astray like sheep, but now you have returned to the shepherd and the guardian of your souls. This is the word of Peter, the apostle, to the church. Thanks be to God. There have been periods in America's past, and we're again in one now, where people are openly attempting to pass laws that would require all Americans to live as a majority believes they should live, limiting the rights of people with different beliefs and lifestyles than the majority believes. In the past, these people included women, natives, people of different races and different religious beliefs. And today the emphasis is on the LGBTQ community and immigrants, with a scattering of laws being rescinded that were designed to protect women and people of color. On the surface, these people argue, why not pass laws that reflect what we believe? Isn't that how the system works? And today I'm going to explain how that mindset is not only un-American, it's un-Christian. I'm going to lay this out in a way of thinking that not only rejects freedom, a great gift of God, but it ignores justice from both the American and the Christian perspective. In 1905, George Santayana noted, "Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it." I've shared many times from this pulpit that Jesus said little, or in some cases nothing, about many of the great arguments of our time, but he spoke at length about hypocrisy. And today I'm going to dive into one of the great hypocrisies of our age. One that ignores not just Christian values, but even fundamental American values. And the perpetrators of this great hypocrisy are, like the scribes and the Pharisees of Jesus' time, many of the most vocal, self-proclaimed defenders of supposedly God and righteous values. Today there are a multitude of people who are so unaware of past social mistakes, so afraid of people who are different color, different religion, different language, different sex, that they intentionally support profound injustices. They intentionally offend, injure, and even openly sin against those they don't try or even want to understand. Those that they don't want to accept. Choosing an example from our past, the Deep South has a long-standing reputation for ignorance, fear, and injustice among a wide range of groups. Racism against people of color, anti-Semitism against Jews, sexism against women. A century after losing the Civil War, the South was still fighting it. Jim Crow laws that existed that didn't just support racism, they legalized it. To be different in the South, and South here means as far north as Kentucky and Virginia, meant being subject to cross burnings on the lawns and homes of synagogues. I once worked with a really nice guy out of Little Rock, Arkansas, who was relating stories when he was in high school of driving around in a pickup truck with some friends and whacking black people along the backside of their head with brooms as they were driving past. It seemed hilariously funny to him at the time. After all, they weren't hurting anyone, right? But he didn't seem so humorous to him now, as he had grown older, and he had developed some experience and empathy for the people that he once terrorized. A few decades back, the nation of Germany was struggling from the economic fallout of a disastrous war. Some uneducated fool stood up and declared that Germany was a victim of Western prejudice, and it was the Jews who were at the root of all of their problems. Jews who were jealous of their obvious Aryan superiority and physical and intellectual perfection. That man encouraged an entire country of good, God-fearing Christians to not just willingly but enthusiastically commit some of the most horrendous crimes against humanity the world has ever experienced. Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. But to remember the past, you have to pay attention to it. Accept that it actually happened. And compare it against what is currently happening today. But history is so boring. And current events around the world don't have anything to do with my life anyway, right? Obviously, nothing could be further from the truth. There are people who believe we should just ignore the arguments and conflicts of others and not get involved. But history has taught us that conflicts and wars over there are like wildfires, and if not addressed or contained over there, they quickly find themselves on our doorstep. Americans didn't want to be any part of the great conflict in Europe at the turn of the 20th century. But submarine attacks on American commercial and even passenger ships, and the revelation of German intentions of trying to ally with Mexico to war on the United States sucked us into that war to end all wars. Americans had no stomach for yet another war in Europe just a generation later. And we were in the throes of our own economic disaster that we called the Great Depression. But as we remained neutral during the first 2 years of that Second World War, watching as Germany and Japan consumed their neighbors, we still found ourselves assaulted and humiliated on a Sunday morning at Pearl Harbor. What history has taught us is that it is not possible to ignore the conflicts and wars of others, because they will, like wildfires, eventually travel to our doorstep. So when we see a major nation like Russia annex a small part of Ukraine in 2014, just as Germany annexed Austria in 1938, we should take notice. And just as Germany promised Austria was the end of their intentions for expansion, while they simply regrouped and strengthened themselves for the next round of annexations of Poland and Czechoslovakia, Russia followed the exact same playbook, invading all of Ukraine again in 2022, all while declaring they had no intention of doing so. As this unfolds, we can plainly see history repeating itself. And those with a recollection and understanding of history don't just see what's happening, they can see what's going to happen. Those with a recollection of understanding of history recognize it's better to support Ukraine now than wait for our friends and allies in Poland, in Germany, and France, and England to be invaded in kind. We don't want the cost of another war in treasure or in lives. But history has taught us that pretending situations like this aren't our problem doesn't make them go away. Just like people that pretend that God doesn't exist won't make their judgment any less real. But there are other equally pressing issues taking place here in the U.S. Things that history has also already clearly taught us, but that many ignorant and foolish people want to ignore for their own benefit. Here, religious extremists are actively trying to undermine the very nature of our American democracy through an intensive attempt to integrate their personal religious beliefs into the fabric of our country's laws. And if that feels like an inflammatory statement or an unjust political position from the pulpit, please hear me out. When our country was just a scattered collection of colonies, most of them were also theocracies, lands where the dominant religion and the laws of the land overlapped. Maryland was Catholic, Pennsylvania was Quaker. There were Puritans in Massachusetts and Anglicans in New York. These colonies were formed because the people forming them couldn't practice their beliefs as they wanted to in England. But once these colonies formed here, they began persecuting other beliefs just as they had been persecuted at home. In theocracies, punishments like stoning adulterers or burning witches or blasphemers, conveniently defined as anyone who disagrees with the religious leaders of the moment, aren't just common and aren't just tolerated. They're actually encouraged to keep the peace and keep the people in line. Iran is a modern-day theocracy where the civil laws reflect the dominant Shia Muslim religion. Groups like ISIS do their best to force their ultra-conservative Muslim beliefs on other countries that currently enjoy a wide range of freedom, like rights for women and tolerance for other religions. But ISIS and other extreme groups don't believe other religions should be tolerated at all. The punishment for rejecting their one true religion, and even their extremist interpretations within that religion, because there's actually a few Muslims who actually agree with ISIS's extreme beliefs, those punishments are severe, with death and beheadings not just common, but broadcast. To personally understand just how unjust this kind of system of government is, we only need to imagine how we would feel as Christians if a group like ISIS became dominant in American politics. Jesus taught us exactly how to deal with these situations, which means that when we ignore Jesus, we are, by definition, ignoring genuine Christian values. Love your neighbor as yourself. Love God with all your heart, soul, strength, and spirit. On this hang all the law and the prophets. It's the golden rule. Do unto others as you would want them to do unto you. It's so simple, but so hard to remember when you're angry or afraid. But we need only to imagine how we would feel if a group like ISIS became dominant in American politics. Our forefathers created this great country from a scattered collection of different colonies and different religions, and they intentionally removed the religious aspects of those theocracies from our new laws and the language of rights and justice that emerged, so that we could exist as a common society in the real world. Only by separating religion, what people personally choose to believe about God's expectations, could our nation effectively lead and protect its people. All of its people. Witches being burned alive and unbelievers being banished or put to death is a part of our history, but a part that we've abolished and declared unjust, as is the legacy of slavery in our treatment of Native Americans. We put a lot of time and effort as a country into eradicating other forms of injustice too. Racism, sexism, anti-Semitism, to name a few. But while we can finally say that we don't have to be worried about being burned alive as a witch, even if we publicly identify as one, can we honestly argue that all of those other injustices in our past are now extinct? And if they're not extinct, they can, and sometimes do, reappear from time to time. But there are extremists who call themselves protectors of Christian and American values who are actively trying to undermine what men like Franklin and Jefferson and Madison worked so hard to define and create. People who actively support drafting laws that take away the rights of those who are different from them, because those American rights don't align with these closed-minded people choose to believe. Some people in the South believed blacks and Jews and foreigners didn't deserve the same rights and privileges under the law that white, Protestant, God-fearing Americans enjoyed. Those people supported and passed laws that undermine the rights and freedoms of millions that they viewed as less worthy than themselves. They passed laws that prevented people of color from being out after dark, sitting in the same part of the bus or at the restaurant as whites, from using the same restroom or drinking from the same water fountain. Good, God-fearing Americans. From the perspective of being an American, the hypocrisy is stunning. From the perspective of calling themselves Christian, the hypocrisy was profound. It's here in this behavior that Jesus' warnings about hypocrisy and being rejected at a time of judgment are easiest to understand. Political and even Christian extremists are actively attempting to pass laws that remove or prohibit the freedoms of people they disagree with today. People they view as sinners or unworthy of protection. Where the founders of this nation did their best to establish a political system that protected everyone, regardless of popular majority, so long as they weren't usurping the rights or injuring anyone else. There are people today who are actively trying to undermine those same original protections because of the people being protected simply offend the extremists. Some of the most ignorant and foolish are actively attempting to reestablish a theocracy here in the United States. You might ask yourself, so what's the harm of trying to embed strong Christian values into our laws? And if you're asking that question, you, A, have no idea of how terrible these systems have worked in the past, or even in the present. Would you really want to live in Iran? And B, you have forgotten your core Christianity values. Jesus' instructions to love and care for your neighbor, even the one you disagree with. To treat them as you would want to be treated. Those who ignore Jesus refuse to offer justice when they believe that they're right. They refuse to offer mercy because they have the strength and the power to force others to do what they want them to do. They refuse to forgive because their opponents deserve rebuke and condemnation. And they refuse grace, rejecting their neighbors as sinful and unworthy of being loved as they are. They call themselves Christian, but their actions reveal a very different set of beliefs. History and the Bible expose an unending cascade of hypocrites, people who said one thing with their words but lived in a very different way. Jesus railed against hypocrisy, the same hypocrisy that killed him. But those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. We can see this hypocrisy being repeated right now, today, among people who call themselves patriots, but who are actively trying to edit or even eliminate rights and freedoms our country has proclaimed since its origin. We can see this hypocrisy being repeated right now, today, among people who call themselves Christians, but who reject everything Jesus taught and showed us. Hypocrites who expect justice and mercy and freedom for themselves, but actively try to deny justice and freedom for others that they disagree with. As I've done a few times in recent weeks, I'm going to combine a few verses here for effect and clarity. These are all verses directly taken from Scripture, just not in this specific order. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter into the kingdom, but only the one who does the will of my Father. When the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, then he will sit on the throne of his glory, and he will repay everyone for what they have done. All the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate people from one from another as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. Then he will say to those at his left hand, you who are accursed, depart from me into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, and you gave me no food. I was thirsty, and you gave me nothing to drink. I was a stranger, and you did not welcome me. Naked, and you did not give me clothing. Sick and in prison, and you did not visit me. On that day, many will say to me, Lord, Lord, didn't we prophesy in your name, cast out demons in your name, and do many mighty works in your name? Then I will declare to them, hypocrites, I never knew you. For you tithe mint and dill and cumin, but neglected the weightier matters of the law, justice and mercy and faith. The measure you gave during your lives will be the measure you receive. Depart from me, you who practiced lawlessness. The tests, the self-tests for us, are relatively simple to gauge our American response. Just flip the question. Think Jews should be marginalized? Flip it. What if the majority was Jewish and they wanted to pass a law criminalizing Christianity? They would be, after all, the majority, right? Think homosexuality should be a crime? Flip it. What if the majority was homosexual and they wanted to pass a law denying or criminalizing heterosexual marriage? They would, after all, be the majority, right? Jesus taught us that putting ourselves into the shoes of our opponent, loving them as we love ourselves, can give us a crystal clear understanding of whether something is righteous or sinful. Which means that this isn't just an American response. It's a Christian one. Christians trying to criminalize or even just marginalize people who are different are no different than the fools in our past who did the same. They've just become the fools in our present who are trying to do it now. The path of the world is fear, anger, violence, and compulsion when you're right and other people are wrong. The path of the Christian, the disciple of Jesus, is love, patience, tolerance when you're right and others are wrong. The path of the world and exclusion leads to an ever-increasing spiral of anger and violence. The path of Christ leads to liberty and happiness, freedom and joy, and ultimately life. One needs only look at the results, the fruits of each path, to clearly see there is only one path to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We are all going to have differences of opinion. As humans, we have a choice. Fight until only one version of the truth remains, whether by their or your surrender. Or allow for the possibility that there may be more than one way of looking at this. And even if there isn't, that it may be better for you and your opponent to agree to disagree. And allow one another to live as each believe it should be lived. Endowed by God, our Creator, with certain inalienable rights. And then among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Not just my happiness, or our happiness, but their happiness too. Regardless of how we believe that life, or their life, should be lived out. Martin Niemöller was a prominent Lutheran pastor in Germany during the rise of Hitler. At first, he sympathized with early Nazi ideals, but later he became an outspoken critic, and he became known for this quote. First, they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. You don't have to agree with something you don't like. You don't have to do any of those things while you allow them or support them while they exist. But you better be active in protecting the rights of others, because there will be situations when your rights need protecting one day. Because those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. And those who cannot remember the teaching and example of Jesus, the Messiah, the Christ, are doomed to something far worse than just repeating the hypocrisies of the past. Amen. There's been a change in next week's plan message. It's no longer going to be the Christian quiz. The message is basically, why am I telling you this? The reading for the week is John 16. And the reflection for the week, would you rather receive a warning before or after? Let us say together the prayer on 4, 5, 6. O Lord, open my eyes that I may see the needs of others. Open my ears that I may hear their cries. Open my heart so that they need not be without support. Let me not be afraid to defend the weak because of the anger of the strong, nor afraid to defend the poor because of the anger of the rich. Show me your love and hope and faith in me, and use me to bring them to those places. And so open my eyes and my ears, that I may this coming day be able to do some work of peace for you. Hi, I'm Dan Thaxton, and I'm the pastor here in New Lebanon. I hope you found this morning's message interesting, educational, and maybe even a little inspiring. And if you have, I'd like you to at least consider giving some thought to pressing the like button on your video. That will help other people who are looking for similar quality content to find it if they're doing searches on YouTube. If you found this information useful and valuable to you, please consider giving some thought to making a donation to the church. Not everybody realizes that our church is completely voluntary. There is no payroll. So all of your offerings will go directly to mission and outreach, or indirectly in the way of internet and electrical services and the like. Lastly, if you found this content interesting and useful, we have an entire library of similar messages and lessons available on our internet site at www.newlebanonumc.com. New Lebanon UMC is all one word, .com. And there you'll find a collection of messages, lessons categorized by title and subject, with a YouTube link to finding it. With that, thank you again for watching, and I wish you all a very blessed day.